is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. At least that's our name for now. This weekend, we are offering 7 conversations from episodes 29 and 30, our real-time coverage of EASL Congress 2023. Plus, on Tuesday, we will be reposting episode 28 with Mike Betel from the Fatty Liver Alliance, and I, interviewing Dr. Tetiana Deshko, Director of Programs at the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. These episodes speak for themselves, so I'm going to keep the introduction short and sweet, leaving more time for the conversations themselves. This conversation covers a few interesting moments from the conference, starting with the appearance of Tetiana Deshko from the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. Jeff McIntyre bridges from here to the broader issue of how we support fatty liver treatments in parts of the world that lack hepatologists or adequate resources, either due to war or poverty, or both. We discuss the idea that Predictive Health Intelligence in the UK has begun to improve patient screening dramatically with a simple, non-AI-based data analysis methodology that can probably be applied in lots of regions. Mike Betel comments on a session where the question arose whether physicians should inform patients about having fatty liver disease before drug therapies are available to treat it. Spoiler alert, the patient advocate answer is an emphatic yes. And then finally, my closing question asks the group how what they learned at the Congress will change their work going forward. Not surprisingly, answers vary. They're pretty interesting. For a variety of reasons, the entire community looked forward to this meeting with an intensity and excitement I, at least, had not seen in previous events. These 7 conversations suggest that the actual event met or exceeded these high expectations. So did the fact that the Tsunami podcast will spend the next month with 5 episodes reviewing highlights from meetings in detail. A lot happened, a lot's worth thinking about, a lot worth listening to. So sit back, listen, enjoy, learn, and when you're done, join the discussion on our LinkedIn or Facebook discussion groups.
Today's episode is sponsored by Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, Incorporated. Madrigal is a clinical-stage biopharmaceutical company pursuing novel therapeutics for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or NASH, a liver disease with high unmet medical need. Madrigal's lead candidate, resmetirom, is a once-daily, oral thyroid hormone receptor, THR-beta selective agonist designed to target key underlying causes of NASH in the liver. For more information, visit www.madrigalpharma.com.
This is the 200th episode of this podcast right now that we're recording, and 199 of those have been about liver disease. And the one that wasn't was recorded, yesterday, Mike? 2 days ago. The organizers for the opening session invited a speaker named Tetiana Deshko, who is the director of programs for the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. And I missed the general session, but at her press conference, she pretty well had all of us choked up. And in fact, she was in tears at the end. And I asked her if she'd be good enough to sit for an interview. So she agreed to give me half an hour for an interview yesterday. Mike came in because he wanted to take a couple of pictures, got so captivated that he immediately asked a question. And it wound up being a 3-person interview. It's season 4, episode 28. If you haven't heard it, go listen. The things that they deal with that we take for granted. I'm going to ask Mike after I do this to talk about the one that he talks about most. But, to get home from this meeting, she's going to fly to Warsaw. She's then going to drive 5 hours to the Ukrainian border. She'll be held up at the border for however long she is, and then drive another 3 hours into Lviv, stay overnight, and drive another 6 hours to Kyiv the next day. And those 9 hours are all on open roads. Now, not in the most dangerous part of Ukraine, but in the counteroffensive, Putin's bombing everything, or at least he was until the Wagner Group decided to try to take over Rostov-on-Don this morning. We'll see what happens with that. But the level of risk and stress and suffering that people in that country live with every day is just indescribable. If you really want to know how fortunate we are, and at the same time hear a story of a country of people with remarkable will and courage, go find that interview.
Mike Betel.
Roger, let me say kudos to you for doing the interview and for highlighting what's going on there. I've got friends from Ukraine and have been following the situation there quite in detail, and I think it's so easy to get consumed by, the geopolitics of that area. I think it's also important to acknowledge that while Ukraine is a horrible situation, they are not alone in the world in enduring horrible situations right now, and that as we speak with our colleagues in Africa and Asia and Latin America, whatnot, there are countries that have one hepatologist, maybe 2 hepatologists in the whole nation. And so while we debate about non-invasives and debate about a therapy that's going to require 12 treatments by a specialist of some sort, we've essentially just written that country off because the geopolitics and the reality around those areas are just not supportive of being able to do that. And I feel like Ukraine really points out to the immediate emergency of us helping helping those most at risk in the worst case scenarios. And if we can't figure out to help those populations, then our just kind of skimming the top 5 or 10% of patients off the top really hasn't approached the issue.
That makes good sense to me. And I'm going to touch on one other thing where we may assume that we need more affluence than we need in order to make a solution, but it's a little dicey. Louise, in the preview, talked about a paper from the Predictive Health Intelligence group in Somerset, UK, where they used a simple non-AI algorithm. They just crunched data the old-fashioned way and were able to identify that among patients at risk in the Somerset region, only 11% of men and 16% of women were ever screened. And that in the population, the probability was in that population should have been screened, half probably had some form of NASH. So they put it in the context of clinical trials. Clinical trial recruitment is hard, but they are sub-optimizing that region by 2x on women and probably 3 to 4x on men. It also says that we don't necessarily need huge data engines like we think about in the U.S. in order to take data and start to identify patients better, as long as the country has some kind of decent commitment to centralized data. So I found that very, very optimistic.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We met with them as well, and several members of their staff have prior experience and history in the diagnostic area. And I kept asking them in the meeting going, okay, so is this AI? And they were like, no. Okay, so machine learning? They're like, no. And I'm like, oh, so what are you doing here? How are you doing this? And then they showed the results in the process, and it's quite remarkable. I mean, I think it also plays to us not getting so caught up by the shiny object of AI and really focusing on the works in front of us for the populations that are in front of us.
Amen to that. So, Michelle, you look like you wanted to say something.
Michelle Long.
Just going to say, absolutely. I think that the value of spending time to actually implement the science, right, and actually get this in the hands of providers and get the innovations to the patients. That's where we so often fall short. Not just us. This is not a liver problem. This is a medicine problem that we really, really, really need to do better, because, there's so much creating the next new thing that's shiny and incrementally better. But if it's not usable and it doesn't make it into the office, it's not worth the effort.
Jeff Lazarus asked a question at one of the sessions, and the room kind of exploded because the question was, should patients be informed about their disease? And it's like, so a bunch of us stood up and yeah, absolutely you should. So like Michelle, we want to get better at the treatments, but the patients have an opportunity to actually help themselves before it's an issue. So we don't always have to wait till it advances. We want to do that, what they're calling now the upstream approach too, right? Is trying to get some improvement in the liver even before it becomes a problem. So I'm glad that came up. But yeah, patients should know what their condition is.
Not the way you would have wanted it to come up. One of the patient advocates literally stood up and said, I only have one word for you, shame. Why don't we do this in closing? One thing that you think will change in how either you do your work or the community as a whole sees the disease as a result of things, maybe not because things today were groundbreaking, new, but subjects of discussion in this meeting that you think will wind up having legs going forward. Brave one, go first.
I'll go first.
Rachel Zayas.
Over the years, a lot of investors, stakeholders, and collaborators said, don't focus on this disease. There's no therapeutic. And my response to that was always, lifestyle and diet modifications will always, always be part of the treatment protocol. And I will always start there because it's patient first. Now, there's soon to be a therapeutic approved. Not yet, but soon. So that's the one thing that will change.
Yeah, I'll go next. You just get the sense from the conversations here that we've gotten so much smarter over time. And we really are looking at the details and the nuances and realizing that they're super important. And we're not taking for granted the data holes, and we are working together to fill them. So it's become even more clear, what some of those gaps are. And, I think there's now some collaboration networks that have been established and forums for things like that we can do that as a community. But it's only when you come together and you really have 4 really intense days to get into it with each other that I think we, can form plans for moving forward.
I will also go along with the improved collaboration and cooperation, interdisciplinary approaches that are just so desperately needed here.
Jeff McIntyre.
I'm going to try not to be too redundant to this, but this is my first EASL Congress, and it's not my first conference since we've kind of begun to experience conference life, with COVID in the world. It was interesting because attending several conferences right before COVID happened. It's big, it's overwhelming. There's so many people and there's so many issues, and people are fighting for their agendas and their airtime and whatnot. And then we went into COVID, and it felt like the world both constricted in terms of what we could do, but in some ways it expanded because suddenly we were forced onto Zoom and Teams and these online platforms to be able to communicate, and we were able to have meetings with people all over the world. To me, coming out of this, the thing that I kind of feel was most significant goes along with what Michael and Michelle are saying, but it's that the world kind of expanded in order to constrict, in order to expand, and yet it keeps going bigger and smaller again and again. And I was able to meet other patient advocates and other partners from parts of the country, parts of the world that I had never met in person before, and being able to see them and engage the personality and then have 5 minutes to just say, so what's going on with you? What are your priorities? What are your challenges? Is so great, as opposed to trying to figure out the time zones and set up a Zoom call and hope the technology works. But that ability to just have to be able to say and have a reassuring hand on the shoulder and say, we're there, well, how can we help you, is just a tremendous benefit of this experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to step into something Michelle said and step into that comment and then one of my own. I've only been in this space for 4 years. And when I got into this space, the only thing anybody wanted to know was what the hell do we have to do to get one level of regression of fibrosis so we can get a drug approved? And the questions are so much better, so much richer, so much deeper. I say probably too often that I think we dodged a bullet in 2020 when OCA did not get approved because we would have been on a far inferior path had it happened. But I love these discussions. I love the richness. I love the contemplation around it. There are concerns that go along with it. I do believe there's a risk that we're going to misuse the definition of what AI is. And as a result, as better stuff becomes available, you'll go, oh, been there, done that. That doesn't work. I have some fears about that. But I also believe the collaborations we're coming up with make that less likely. I was really energized about all the machine learning stuff, the good machine learning stuff. And I think some of it's really, really exciting. Bobby Fischer, when asked why he was the greatest chess player in the world, said something akin to, you see black squares and white squares. I see streams, promontories, mountains, points of attack. We're getting to the point where some of the image stuff that's being done, Jeff, this is the kind of thing you mentioned, where we can start to see that. And when you can start to map it in 3 dimensions, you're just in a whole different place in terms of what you can appreciate. So I leave 3% exhausted and 97% optimistic. And if the meeting lasted another half a day, I probably would be 1% exhausted and 99% optimistic. But we'll take it. Then I want to second what Hannah said. I think the organizers did a fantastic job of putting this thing together. I'm impressed by EASL every year, more so this year than in previous years even.
Today's episode has been sponsored by Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, Incorporated. Madrigal is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company pursuing novel therapeutics for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or NASH, a liver disease with high unmet medical need. Madrigal's lead candidate, resmetirom, is a once-daily, oral thyroid hormone receptor, THR-beta selective agonist designed to target key underlying causes of NASH in the liver. For more information, visit www.madrigalpharma.com.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. Next week begins our 5-episode review of key EASL Congress findings. Also, keep an eye and ear out on LinkedIn and Facebook for invitations to share your thoughts on our upcoming brand change, given that, as people keep writing, and I quote, NASH is dead. Long live MASH and MASL, end of quote. So until then, stay safe, surf on. If you're in the States, enjoy the July 4th weekend, and we'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.